It'll be easy to understand. It's not overly scientific like last week's. This is just really going to be easy to follow. I hope you enjoy it. And afterwards, we'll see how much time we have, and we'll have a little discussion about it. And I'm going to leave and go work on some things. see if I can support the people trying to get us up. So, all right, God bless you. I look forward to talking to you when this is over.
And our last question, which we're going to spend quite a bit of time on, is what has to be the nature of that cause? And there's several dimensions to this. The first question is it a personal cause or is it something that is not personal? If it's a personal cause, then there would be design, there would be planning, there would be intelligence in the creation in which we see. If it's not personal, then everything is the result of rote, mechanistic, opportunistic chance. That there is no intelligence, there is no purpose, there is no design in the creation in which we exist. I tried to point out to you that at the college level and at the high school level, we get a pretty heavy indoctrination with the idea that we are just chance. We looked at the discussion of Richard Dawkins in his book, Rivers of Out of Eden, and saw that in this college level book, there is a very direct statement to the idea that everything is a result of blind chance. This is a statement from a junior high school science book, a statement by Huxley, which says it eloquently. And I tried to point out to you at the end of our last presentation that this is not a statement of science. This is a statement of personal religious ideology. Now look at this statement. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to. For myself, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation, sexual and political. You want to justify a sexual lifestyle? Get rid of any notion of God. I've had students in college lectureships come up to me sometimes and say, I really can't argue with anything you said, but I don't want to change my living arrangement. In other words, they want to justify a sexual lifestyle by denying the concept of there being design and purpose in the creation. Politically, you can embrace anything if you reject the concept of us having a purpose to exist. And I would suggest to you that there has been a great deal of turmoil and suffering politically in the world because leaders have, in fact, embraced such a viewpoint. But these are moral, religious, political concepts that have to do not with science, not with evidence, but with the choices and beliefs of human beings on a very different level. What I'd like to do is show you some of the evidence that I think suggests that there is design. Now, I've said this before, and I want to say it again, and I'll probably mention it several more times. We're not suggesting this is a way of doing science. This is an apologetic. This is looking at the answer to the question of is there purpose in the creation or is it all driven by blind mechanistic chance, as Dawkins and Huxley have stated in the material we have looked at. The first example I want to deal with is what I call intuitive design. Now, by intuitive design, we mean there's no mathematical treatment here. There's no sophisticated discussion in terms of quantitative analysis. We're simply asking you to look at this and consider the possibilities. And one of the areas where this just blows your mind, and you have to wonder at it no matter what your viewpoint is about these two issues, is the questions related to migration. One of my favorite examples is the Arctic tern. Here is a relatively small bird that travels every year from its summering areas in the northern part of the United States and Canada to the southern end of South America. That's a distance of 12,000 miles one way. So every year this bird is flying 24,000 miles round trip. The question is, how do they do this? how do they make this migration? Now, you know of other examples we could talk about, but right now let's just take a look because there's been a great deal of experimentation involved at the Arctic tern. One of the first suggestions that was made about this was that the tern in some way uses landmarks, that they see their way from one point to another. So what happened was the tern was equipped with contact lenses, essentially, which made the tern so nearsighted that it couldn't possibly see landmarks on the ground. When they did this and turned the tern loose over its area where it had spent the summer, the tern was able to make the journey without any problems, even though it obviously could not even see the ground. So the next suggestion was, well, maybe they hear their way. Maybe they've got some kind of sound that they follow. Wind blowing through mountain passes, water lapping on shores. Maybe there's a sound initiative here. So they equipped some Arctic terns with earmuffs, essentially, which made the sound around them so obtuse that they couldn't possibly follow it. And the tern was still able to make the journey. Well, the next suggestion was that maybe they smell their way. You know, maybe there are odors that come from South America on the jet stream or something like this, and that they're able to follow the odor. So they equipped terns with gas masks, essentially, which gave them the capacity to fly without being able to make any kind of sensory observation based upon smell. And they were still able to make the journey. Well, then the next suggestion was, well, maybe they're using the Earth's magnetic field. We know that almost all living things have magnetic domains in their brains or in other parts of their anatomy which enable them to do some navigation. So the idea was, well, maybe they're using the Earth's magnetic field. So they put magnetic scramblers on the tern. And the tern still was able to make the journey. So now the question became, well, are they learning to do this? Maybe it's something that the parents teach the baby how to do, how to fly. And maybe it's just been passed on from generation to generation. So they did some interesting experiments. They took an Arctic tern that had been hatched in a laboratory. This bird had never seen another Arctic tern. And they took the tern to the northern areas in the first summer. And in the fall of the year, when all the other terns had left and had already gone south, they took the baby tern with a radio transmitter on its back, and they released it over the place where it had been found as an egg. You know what happened? The tern took off, it flew along the same route that its parents had flown, and it landed not far from its original mother and father on the southern edge of South America just a short time later. So you obviously can't talk about learning. And when you look at all the experiments that have been done with the tern, the consensus now is that they don't have just one sense that enables them to make this journey, but that all of those senses that we have talked about, sight, sound, magnetic field, odors, that all of these things are a part of their capacity to make the journey, and it is a part of their genetic makeup. Now the question is, how does it become programmed into their genes? You have to realize that this process of being able to make the journey is indigenous to a variety of different animals, and it has some very definite purposes involved in it. It's just not a matter of nesting areas, it's also a matter of food. It's also a fact that the Arctic tern supplies and supports more than one ecosystem. The tern supports areas in the far north where the eggs are used as a food source for many different animals, including the Arctic fox. The tern provides fertilizer for plants because the soils in those areas are extremely deficient of minerals. The tern is a vital part of not only the system in the far north, but also in the far south. You see, logic would say, well, there's no reason for the tern to fly 12,000 miles. If all they're trying to do is to get away from the cold, why don't they stop in Miami like everybody else does? I mean, there's no reason to add 6,000 miles to the journey if all you're trying to do is to get away from the cold. But they provide for the two ecosystems very far apart by making the journey. There is a logical reason for it. It does not involve learning. Because as we've indicated, the experiments have shown that they can do it whether they've had contact with the parents or not. It does not involve any kind of survival technique, because they wouldn't have to go all the way to the South Pole, essentially, to get away from the cold. They could stop in tropical areas. I suggest to you there's a logic, there's a reason, there's a purpose, there's a design in them making this journey. Now, there are smaller forms of life that do this in incredible ways. I'm sure you've heard about the monarch butterfly. Here is a very small insect that has learned to do this by a very similar type of process. The butterflies spend their winter in a very small area in Mexico. And if you've read National Geographic or the Smithsonian Magazine, there have been many discussions about the ecological concerns of what's happening in the nesting areas of the butterflies. What many people don't realize is that these butterflies come from widely different areas. Many of them come from the eastern United States and even into Canada. They fly together en masse as the milkweed that they feed upon ripens to the area in Mexico where they spend the winter. It's fascinating to look at the research that's been done on this. When they have a tailwind, they fly high so the wind pushes them along. If they're running into a headwind, then they fly close to the ground, minimizing the effects of the wind. The question is, how do they know to do that? How is that programmed into their genetic makeup? Their timing is perfect. But you have to realize that it's not one single butterfly that makes the journey up and back. The butterflies have laid their eggs. There have been the caterpillars produced. The caterpillars have spun their cocoons. New butterflies have come about. And yet all butterflies have come about with the capacity to make the journey. Obviously, they don't learn it. Obviously, the senses that they use must again be multiple, but unlike the tern, they have a different set of criteria. In this case, how they fly relative to the wind, the speed at which they move, and their food sources. All of those things are a part of their migratory journey. Salmon, who apparently primarily use smell as a basis of locating their parent stream, do a very similar thing. The number of animals that do things by migration is absolutely huge. And there have been wonderful, wonderful books. There have been wonderful television programs dealing with the migration process and how this is built into the genetic material of the animals to be able to do it successfully, not only providing for them, but providing for the ecosystem. When I was in Alaska, I learned firsthand how important salmon migration is to the entire ecology of Alaska. The food sources for the bears, the materials that are necessary for the plants to grow. Without the salmon, the ecosystem as a whole would not survive. I suggest to you there's purpose here. There's intelligence there. To try and formulate a chance model to do this is extraordinarily difficult. I didn't say impossible. Obviously, people have given explanations based upon chance. But I suggest to you there's an intuitive evidence of design that as you watch this happen, you have to ask yourself, can this really be something that is developed on the basis of chance? Some will say yes. I suggest the answer is no. Let me give you another example. There's two basic kinds of mammals. One kind of mammal is a mammal like me, a placental mammal. A placental mammal is one in which the baby is born basically fully formed, but basically helpless. I developed for 9.5 months inside my mother. And when I came into this world, I weighed 7.5 pounds and I had all my equipment. I had my eyes, I had my ears, I had my nose, I even had hair at that time. I was fully equipped. Now, the other kind of animal that we're talking about here is a marsupial mammal. And the classic example is the kangaroo. When you see a picture like this with a baby in the mother's pouch, that's not a baby. As a matter of fact, essentially that's a teenager. When a baby kangaroo is born, the kangaroo is very, very small. Incidentally, when I was in Australia, one of the things that was kind of fun was to watch the mother trying to kick the baby out of the pouch. You would see the mother hopping around and the baby in pursuit. If the mother made the wrong turn, the baby would dive into the pouch. And you could just see a pained expression on the mother's face as the baby landed in the pouch. And she would just sit down and say, well, I'm not moving until you get out of there. But of course, he's looking for a free meal. And You have to look at this and just feel for the mother in this situation. But again, when the baby was born, it wasn't anything like that. A baby kangaroo looked something like this. Instead of developing for 9.5 months, it has been developing for approximately 5 weeks. And it comes into this world as a helpless fetus. Well, not exactly helpless. I mean, here's an actual picture of a baby kangaroo at birth sitting next to a normal Indiana wasp. I want you to notice something. He has no functional eyes, no functional ears, no functional tail. He is virtually helpless. You know what he has to do in that condition? He has to crawl over 10 times his body length vertically up the stomach of a mother until he locates the top of her pouch. Here is a picture, an actual picture of a baby kangaroo at the instant of birth. A few seconds later, the baby turned over. He started wriggling and squirming his way up the stomach of the mother and ultimately ended up inside the pouch, hooked on to the mother's nipple. Now let's back up here for just a minute. Let's suppose he doesn't make it. Let's suppose he falls off, and mother doesn't help him. She doesn't even seem to be aware that he's there. Listen to this. If the baby doesn't make it into the pouch, he has a baby brother or a baby sister already conceived, already developing inside the mother that would be born within 3 to 5 weeks. If he does make it into the pouch and starts drawing milk from the mother, baby brother or sister will go into a state of suspended animation and will develop no further until he's out of the pouch. Now, if he goes 2 days and dies of a congenital deformity, at that point, baby brother or sister will resume their development. If he goes 5 weeks and dies of a disease, at that point, baby brother or sister will resume their development. If he goes 9 months and leaves on his own steam, at that point, baby brother or sister will resume their development. There is always a baby waiting in the wings. The female kangaroo is perpetually pregnant. And ladies, if that doesn't give you a nightmare, nothing will. You engineers thought that you thought up the first backup system. Here's a backup system that defies anything man's ever done, and engineers will be the first ones to tell you that backup systems are much more difficult to engineer than primary systems. By the way, in the United States, we have an animal that's very similar to this, the possum. And it's important to realize when you deal with the possum that you're dealing with an animal that has very much the same characteristics. But by the way, I'm still not done with the kangaroo. Did you notice in this picture that there are 2 nipples? The nipple the baby is on is a low-fat milk nipple. The larger nipple there is a high-fat milk nipple, which is some 20% higher in fat content than the small nipple. Now, when the baby comes into the pouch, he has to get the right nipple because his body cannot metabolize the high-fat content of the large nipple. No problem. The high-fat nipple is so large, he can't get it in his mouth. He always gets the right nipple. Well, then how do you make him switch? Well, when the baby gets big enough to be able to handle the high-fat content, he's larger and his weight is pushing down on the bottom of the pouch. The bottom of the pouch is connected to the small nipple. So when the baby starts to push down on the bottom of the pouch, the small nipple is being pulled up into the mother. So the first time that mama kangaroo takes a king-size hop with baby sitting on the bottom of the pouch, that pushes down on the bottom of the nipple, pops the small nipple into her body, and the only nipple he can now get is the high-fat milk nipple, which better meets his needs. Now again, the question here is, do we explain this on the basis of a long series of singularly beneficial accidents? Or is this a demonstration of intelligence and design and purpose in the creation? That's an intuitive answer. People, depending upon their prejudice on these things, will give different answers. But it is an interesting example of design. Now, we've just talked here for a few minutes about one simple illustration of design on an intuitive level, and that is instinctive behavior in migrations, or in the case of the kangaroo, in reproduction. There are literally thousands of examples like the ones I have shown you. And as a matter of fact, we have a couple of books that are available upon request. These can be borrowed free of charge. They are called Dandy Designs. And at the time we're making this presentation and these videos, we have 4 versions of these. We'll probably have a 5th one here very shortly. And these books contain, each of them, over 100 examples like the 2 I've just shown you. We have a series of presentations on the web. The website is dandydesigns.org, and they give you examples like the ones that we have been looking at. And you are welcome to go there and look at those. You're welcome to print them out or to use them in any way that you might wish to use them. We have in our printed materials, first of all, bibliographical sources that give you examples of this. There's books like The Mystery of Migration that go in detail into some of the things that I have tried to present to you here, and these bibliographies are available upon request. We also have a children's series that deals with this on the level of a child, and a children's website, ScienceTerrific.org. And if you're interested, we have a book that puts this material into a form that can be studied at your own leisure. It puts all of our discussion together. It's called The Source. We have a high school level version, we have a college level version, and you can borrow the book free of charge. All you need to do is to contact us for any of the materials that we have in the program. We also have a bi-monthly journal that helps you stay current in the things about which we're talking. If you'd like to be on our mailing list, you can contact us and we'll be glad to add you to our monthly publication list. Here is our address that you can use to contact us. We hope to hear from you. Now, we've looked at intuitive examples. The next thing we want to look at in our next presentation is architectural examples.
So I've watched this multiple times over the years, shown it to a lot of people. And just kind of, we'll open it up for a second. I have some thoughts on it. But what impressed you or what is something out of this that kind of stood out in your mind?
And that it stops developing until there's room in the couch for another baby.
Yeah, so Monica was talking about the kangaroo, and it's amazing that it can even find that little nipple and grab onto it, and amazing that all the other ones quit developing and won't start developing until this one is grown and out of the pouch. Dick?
I just, watching the whole thing, it's very fascinating to me to sit there and think that birds go 12,000 miles. Me being a numbers game, I'm thinking, do they start in June, to go 12,000 miles? And the fact that man can't let it go, there has to be a rationality other than the fact that that's what they were created, that's the way it is. The fact that man has to look at it differently. I think some of the facts that they've dug into, all the different efforts they made, wiring them and all the other stuff, trying to see what's going on. But it's just fascinating. We could go through one example after the other of the animal from God's design, and it's simply meant to be, but man just can't accept that. So.
Yeah, and what blows my mind is when we think of, we've talked earlier, I keep bringing this up because it blows my mind that about 95% of our universe is dark matter and dark energy. In other words, we know things are out there that are affecting us and we don't know they are. So it shows how little we know. And then you look at all of this. I was thinking while I was watching those kangaroos, I don't know why I thought of this, but I thought those kangaroos are the weirdest looking animals I've ever seen. And what I was thinking next was all the animals that we create in our own imaginations that I've seen on Star Wars before. When they've gone into these, other worlds and there's all these little creatures and animals. And that's our imagination. We have an imagination created in the image of God. right? And so we imagine all these things, but God, he doesn't only imagine these things, he actually creates them. And he creates them with designs that blow my mind. I mean, how people can look at that and say this is just all mechanistic chance. To me, those people are crazy. To me, it just doesn't make sense. Bill?
Brings to mind a verse. I can't place my finger on it right now, but it's men are always learning and never understanding.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah. And I think of the Tower of Babel, where men got so smart and full of themselves, they thought they were going to be a tower to heaven, and what God did to them. And I worry sometimes about us because we think we're a lot smarter now. What could happen down the road? I don't know. Yes, Brian.
The thing about it is the absolute diversity of organisms, all the way from bacteria to mammals, whatever, and how everything's symbiotic. They work together. I mean, there's a purpose in everything, from
Yeah.
the smallest to the bacteria to the whatever.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's what I never could understand. People that promote chance. Well, then where'd all this diversity come? If it's 1,000,000 to 1 shot that a single cell thinking, then what about the hundreds of thousands of different species?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
It does
at all.
not make any sense, does it? Alan?
Work yesterday about creation, and some people think that an amoeba came out of the sea, and developed into whatever. And I asked my boss, I said, well, where did the sea come from? Who created the sea, if that was the case? Yeah, the sea has to be resting on something, and it has to rest on the earth. So when you go back, what created what?
Yeah.
And it wasn't by chance that the sea created itself or the earth created itself.
Yeah. It's like your joke last week, get your own dirt. So here's another part. So this is, and we're going to do another one on design next week. And what's amazing is you can just go on and on and on and on with this. It doesn't stop. The diversity and the amount of design that you have in created life. But he didn't really talk about this one. I think he does in some other video. But something that I think about is just us as human beings, the way our mind works, the way our emotions are, the way our spirit is. We have this kind of inner drive to love and to be loved, and we have this inner drive to achieve something. We're not sure what it is, and I think that's sort of the dilemma in life, isn't it? Is as human beings we seek meaning and purpose in life, and of course the story of the Bible is that you don't find meaning and purpose and true love without God. You can't find it without God. And so to some degree, when I left the Lord back when I was about 18, 19, I think that I just wanted to live the way I wanted to live is what I think. And so it was easy for me to claim sort of being agnostic. But, sometimes when I think of the Revelation passages where he says, I wish you were either hot or cold, but since you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out. So somebody asked me about that recently. I can't remember who. And I gave them an answer, and I said, well, the problem with lukewarm is you never test anything. Lukewarm, you don't take any risks. You don't take any chances. And so you can just trick yourself into thinking everything's okay. When you're hot, you're all in with God. When you're cold, and see, here's the thing. It was a blessing to me that I became cold. I had a lot of friends that were lukewarm. They dabbled in drugs, but not enough to mess up their life. They dabbled in immorality, but they didn't catch anything. They dabbled in all sorts of stuff, and they even came to church on Sunday mornings. Now me, when I left the Lord, I wasn't coming to church. That was hypocritical. And I went all in. And you know what? I found out it doesn't work. And so what brought me back to God was when you go all cold, your life falls apart. And it made me realize that there was no meaning or purpose without God. And that's the danger of lukewarm, is you can just kind of trick yourself. But we know as Christians, we've lived with God. We've probably done things, all of you, that we know God didn't want us to do. And we know that true meaning and purpose comes from God. So that's another part of his design. Not only has he put the keys to his wisdom into nature and shown his ability to engineer, bioengineer the most incredible life forms you could ever imagine, but he's also bioengineered us, the crown of his creation, and he's made us to live in relationship with him and connect spiritually, and you do it by faith. By faith, we connect with our Creator. By faith, he shows us how to walk. By faith, he keeps us protected from sin and the things in our life that would destroy our life. And if you don't think that's true, just go cold for a while. Go cold for a while and see how it works to live without God. Now, don't really do that. There's a whole lot better way to figure out that God's right. Talk to some dummies that already did that, and we'll save you a lot of pain. But anyhow, any other final thoughts? Judy.
I'm kind of curious when I see things like this, how people can delve into such detail of nature. And how many of them come out influenced in saying, this can't have happened by accident. This has to be some kind of design. One of my children said that. What convinced him was that he looks at nature, he looks at the world, and he says, there's no way this could have happened by accident. There has to be a design.
Yeah, I have a friend that, actually, he's not a friend anymore, but many, many, many years ago, I had a friend at the University of Arizona who was getting his PhD in fiber optics of some sort. And whatever he was doing, the government bought his research. And he went to work at Jet Propulsion Laboratories, JPL, in Pasadena, I think. And now he's been working there his entire career, still there. He's done stuff that's been deployed on, the space station. I think he's done stuff with the Hubble telescope. He's done all sorts of stuff. And he's brilliant. And he was raised a Jew. And so I asked him, I said, Stuart, that was his first name, was Stuart. I said, tell me something. Do you believe in a God? Because I knew you didn't go to church or anything. And he said, yeah, there just has to be one. I said, well, why do you believe that? Because he wasn't a practicing Jew. He wasn't a Christian. He says, from studying the universe and studying what I've learned about how it works, there has to be a God. I don't know who that God is. And unfortunately, we didn't stay connected enough in our life for me to be able to talk to him some more about God. And I haven't seen him now in, goodness gracious, 30 years probably. But anyhow, I thought that was interesting. So yes, and of course there's also scientists, that don't believe. And so I guess, but it's by faith. Because they don't know, they can't prove their side. So by faith, they think all this is by chance. To me, that makes a lot less sense than believing in God. Okay, so we're just stopping 2 or 3 minutes early. And thank you for being here. And look forward to next week. Barry will be here next week. And then the following week will be our last class on this series, and Barry and I are going to co-teach it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the age of the earth and how creation happened. And was it 7 literal days, or was it millions of years? And does that matter? We'll talk about that. You may get more than one view on that. So God bless you. Let's say a quick prayer. God, thank you for your love. Thank you for all the design and evidences that you've built into creation so that we can know you're real. Help us to have the faith and the courage to follow you and you alone, and keep us safe as we do that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.